Ambition! Woohoo!
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Welcome
Tiffany's
back.
always a high energy one.
I know. I've just had a coffee, so I'm really like, welcome
Hi,
back,
welcome,
guys.
everybody.
Welcome.
I'm Alex, and this
And
is Tiffany.
Tiffany, hello.
And we've got another guest with us today. We've got a fabulous guest. We've got Leisa Millar. She's an award-winning writer, editor, and strategist. She's got 18 years of experience building engaged digital audiences for leading news and publishing brands. But most importantly, she's also the creator and host of the SEN Mums Career Club, which is a podcast for and about working women raising children with special educational needs. She's an inclusion advocate and, most importantly, a mum of 3. So welcome, Leisa. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Alex, Tiffany. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hello. I think a good place to start, actually, Lisa, would be, let's talk about you in terms of like how do you balance everything? Because I think that's the first thing I was interested in, being a mom, having a career. How do you do it all? Or not do it all?
Yeah, well, that's the answer, actually, isn't it? I don't do it all. I have a lot of help. I think, well, it's such an interesting question. And you know what? That question is the question that started my podcast, because I wanted to know how other women in my situation were doing it, because it's hard. You know, as working mums yourselves, you know, I'm assuming the core of your audience are also working mums, and they, you know, it's hard. We know it's hard.
Yeah.
But I have a daughter who has a very rare genetic condition called Kabuki syndrome. So I've got 3 young children. Bee's my eldest. She's 7. She has Kabuki syndrome. And then I have a 5-year-old, and he's going to turn 2 on Saturday. So I can't get used to saying he's 2, but he's 2. The terrible 2s have very much started. So with Bee, especially, you know, there's a lot of extra stuff that comes with her. So Kabuki syndrome for her has numerous impacts, but probably the thing that impacts the most is that she has a learning disability. So a lot of kind of quote unquote normal tasks, developmental tasks that a 7-year-old should be able to do, she can't do. So she still needs help. For example, eating. We don't let her walk upstairs on her own because she's still a little bit, you know, she's a little bit unsteady. She's got low muscle tone. All sorts of different things like that. She can't get herself dressed. We help her. And she goes to a special school where she's supported because of all of those things. She also has some other physical disabilities as well. For example, she's always had hip dysplasia. That's fairly common with Kabuki syndrome. There are certain issues that, you know, attach themselves to these genetic conditions. So Kabuki syndrome, you quite often find issues with the heart. She has some minor cardiac issues. Her hip dysplasia is fairly common. She's got quite a severe dysplasia in her right hip. Anyway, I digress, but that's the picture of Bee. And, you know, working as a mother is difficult. Working as a mother with a child who's under 10 medical specialists, you know, has a lot of additional care needs, has a lot of additional time required to manage those care needs, particularly in working hours when you're dealing with hospitals and, you know, and professionals, therapies, etc. And I wanted to know how people did it. I read a stat in Jolie Brealey's book, Pregnant Then Screwed, which said that only 3% of women who have a disabled child are in full-time work.
Sorry, did you say 3% there?
3%.
My goodness.
3% in full-time work, 16% in any kind of paid work with a disabled child. So for women, as I'm sure you know, women with a child, it's 61% of women are in paid work if they have a child, and those figures are reversed. If your child is disabled, it's only 16% of women in any kind of paid work, only 3% in full-time paid work. So I was like, why is that number so outrageously small? I mean, I know why. It's really hard. But I was like, where are we? And where are all the other mothers of disabled children? What are they doing? You know, what work are they doing? What work are they not able to do because they have a disabled child? Now, how are they feeling about that? And what I really hadn't found, you know, there's so much great content about motherhood, about working motherhood out there, but what I hadn't found was a place that I felt spoke to me as an ambitious career woman, still wanting to work, but also having that challenge of raising a disabled child who had a lot of additional care needs. So that's where the podcast came from, and it took a couple of years to get up and running. And it was, you know, it's not easy to put yourself out there. I'm sure you guys feel this too. You know, I find it difficult. I still find it, you know, I share a lot about me. I share a lot about our family. It's not the most comfortable for me, but I do feel it's important, because if we don't talk about it, then we're not talking about it. And I'm like, how many people are out there feeling like me, you know, that they're trying to do this on their own and they don't know how to do it. And there are a lot of us, it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary statistic.
It's incredible. But, you know, when you kind of drill into the challenges, I kind of go, well, it's actually a miracle that anybody manages to do it. You know, we know that the systems, for example, if you have a neurotypical child, a healthy child, they don't work, right? You know, working days till 5, school finishes at 3, all of that stuff, you know, and you have wraparound care, you might have holiday clubs. Forget that stuff if your child has a disability, if they're not able to toilet themselves, you know, if they can't interact with other children, like it doesn't exist. There is not provision for that. There is in pockets, but there's not a blanket kind of, it's not commonplace. And I talk to a lot of people, and it really varies where you live, what the provision is. A lot of the time it's provided by charities. So it just depends whether you have access to that or not. So that's a huge issue. I mean, even schooling, even nursery, you know, when it came to time to put B into nursery, we didn't get the diagnosis for her until it was a month before her 2nd birthday. But we knew there was something. So developmentally, she just wasn't hitting her milestones. My pregnancy was as healthy as we expected. We had, you know, genetic screening for all the, you know, the common conditions. Everything came back clear. Everything was fine. So we, you know, proceeded as if this was it.
Yeah, I feel like you probably hit that point in your pregnancy and you think, oh, great, right.
I can relax and enjoy it now. Yeah, absolutely. So when she was born, it was just quite a shock that it was like, oh, there's this, we spotted this issue, and then there's a problem, and then they check her heart. You know, they do that newborn test on the first day, and they kind of wiggle their hips, and they were like, oh, the hips made a funny noise. It's not supposed to do that. So then they take a closer look, and they're like, well, we think there might be a heart murmur, and her fingers look a bit short, and her ears looked a bit misshapen, and you know, and suddenly the whole thing escalates terrifyingly to somebody, you know, my first time mum, I've just given birth, suddenly she's whisked off to Skaboo, and we have no idea what's going on. And a doctor starts asking me all these questions like, are you and your husband related? You know, do you have any of this in your family? And it's terrifying, like the stuff of nightmares, really.
I was just going to say there, Leisa, I can really empathize with you around Skiboo. I had very similar experiences, though I knew from my 20-week scan that Ted had a problem with his lungs. But that moment is still really scary when they have to go there. And I think particularly if you weren't set up to expect that, I can only imagine that was, you know, really, really hard to cope with.
It was such a shock. And, you know, I think having any child just really shows you how totally out of control you are of life. And I think particularly as ambitious women, I was very focused. I wanted to, you know, we got married, we saved for the wedding, we got the wedding, then the plan was to get pregnant, and we did that. And, you know, you're sort of following the plan. You know what you need to put in, and you know the result you want to get. And then having a baby, any baby, just upends that, doesn't it? Like completely. And of course, we put in all these plans around Bea being born. So she was a December baby, really close to Christmas. So we had family coming to stay. We were living in London at the time, and my family weren't close by. And, you know, everything was planned. And suddenly she was in Skaboo, and we didn't know how long she was going to be there. And all I could think was, we've got to get out for Christmas. We've got to get out for Christmas. And it was that added time pressure. And in retrospect, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. None of it matters. But I think that was just really the first rude awakening of very many rude awakenings on this journey, that I am not in control of this. And is that such a bad thing, actually?
I'm interested. Actually, let's take a moment, Lisa. Let's just take a moment for you, because I think everyone has different motherhood stories. When you say, "Oh, it's so hard," and we all complain, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you and what you do on a day-to-day basis, because I think it's such a unique experience and nobody can really understand. So yeah, I'm just want to give you a moment there.
Thank you. And,
No
you know,
problem.
I really appreciate you having me speak to you and recognizing this experience, because I do find it is a different experience. And I think when I talk about this, I'm always so keen to emphasize it is really hard to work and be a mother, a parent, but we know particularly more so for mothers, you know, it is really hard. And I think sometimes when parents of children with disabilities, additional needs, special needs, you know, whatever language you use, whatever your child's challenges might be, it does sometimes, it's not a competition, you know. Like, I sometimes feel like what I'm trying to say is it's not that this is any, it is harder in some ways because there's a lot of additional stuff, but it's not to take away from how hard any experience
Oh no,
of
absolutely,
motherhood is,
absolutely.
because it is so hard. These systems are
Absolutely.
not set up right, any of the systems.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of things I want to pick up from that. The number one is what you said about everyone's experience is different. So I think it's so important to acknowledge that as part of motherhood, because I mean, we had Yasmin Sampson da Rocha on, I think like a couple of weeks ago, and we said, how do you manage motherhood and ambition? And she said, look, I can only talk from a perspective for someone who has a healthy-ish child with physical needs. And I think that's the key. It's saying, look, I can only talk from this perspective. So I'm interested to know, I think there was something you said that I read up on your LinkedIn, and this idea of, number one, expectations versus reality, and also number two, how you find the courage to do what you do. Because I think on one hand, you can experience difficult things in life and you can think, you know what, this is too hard. I'm just going to bury my head over here and kind of be super low key and struggle and kind of just allow that to overtake me, or I can be strong and be an advocate. And it's still hard, but I'll move on anyway. So number one, let's talk about the expectation versus reality. You said the sliding doors moment, the life you expected to have versus the one you've got. Parenting in a parallel universe, been reminded that you're in Holland when everyone else is in Italy.
Yes, so that's a reference to a wonderful piece of writing called Welcome to Holland, which is shared quite a lot in among SEN parents. And it basically sort of describes, tries to describe what this experience is like. And basically it talks about, you know, you're going on holiday to Italy, you buy all the guidebooks, you learn a little bit of the language, you get on the plane, you touch down and you're so excited. And then somebody says, welcome to Holland. And you say, well, I don't want to go to Holland. I want to be in Italy. That's where everyone else has gone. You know, I'm in the wrong place.
No offense, guys.
But then the point is, actually you acclimatize and you go, well, actually Holland is wonderful, and it's got tulips and it's got Rembrandts, and it's an amazing place. It's just not the place I expect it to be. And I think it just does a really good job, a much better job than I'm doing right now, of explaining just that sense of readjustment it takes. And I, you know, I'm very open that I have had a lot of therapy. I think it's so important. I think it's so important that anybody that can access therapy has therapy. You know, it took a big adjustment for me, for my husband, for the whole family. You know, and you know that passage that you read there, Tiffany. That was I wrote that after we went to the theatre with the 3 kids to see the Bluey stage show, and
it's great.
Yeah, it is, but the core narrative is between Bluey and Bingo. I'm assuming a lot of your listeners are familiar with these characters. I won't do any elaborate explanations, but you know, they're sisters with a 2-year age gap, as I have 2 daughters with a 2-year age gap, you know, and it's all about how younger sisters always copy the big sister and the big sister always gets to do things first. And it was just that real moment for me where it was like, oh my God, like, you know, my younger child overtook me developmentally a long time ago. You know, she can do so many things, and the girls are just watching it, you know, like they're happy enough. And it's just that, like, just absolute it just hits you over and over again. It is a little bit like grief, you know, when you're just sort of going about your normal life and then suddenly you just remember that actually it's different for you. And yeah, it does, and it's just important to acknowledge that, you know. I think, you know, it's different. Bee's disability affects our whole family. It affects her younger sister. It affects her little brother. But equally, it's sort of magical watching them get to know each other and form their relationships as it is with any family. You know, it's just different. It's just not what I expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really beautifully put, that, you know, actually seeing them get to know one another is lovely, and it's slightly different to what you expected. You know, I think it is difficult when life throws something at you that you weren't expecting. And I think there's always, with stuff like that, and certainly with my pregnancy, there was an element of why me? Why has this happened to me as opposed to somebody else? And it can be really hard. And I understand what you're saying about, you can feel grief for what the experience you sort of, in inverted commas, should have had. But I think hearing your strength is just really, really impressive, that you've dealt with this. And I think, again, I had therapy to deal with the issues with my pregnancy, my son's operation. I really, really agree that it's such an important thing to do. Even if you haven't been through something majorly life-altering or traumatic, I think it's still important. I wanted to ask something, and I know that Tiffany's got another point that she wanted to pick up on, but did the rarity of the disorder add to that? Was that, you know, the fact that I assume the fact it took so long to get her diagnosis, and correct me if I'm wrong here, was that because doctors just weren't really that familiar with the condition? And
Yes, that was part of it. So they screen for the most common genetic conditions in pregnancy, and when she appeared and it looked like there might be other issues, they did more screening, like a more enhanced screening for even more common genetic conditions, and she didn't have any of those either. And of course, when they're baby, you know, no babies can do anything. They're just babies. And I think, again, this is something that I hadn't quite appreciated, is that it kind of got a little bit harder before it got easier, because we didn't know, because the not knowing is so hard. And again, I think because I was kind of indoctrinated into that, you know, work hard, you'll get your just rewards, you know, if you're ambitious, if you overachieve, you know, you'll be successful, which is a really ableist narrative. I remember going to a play date with her. I talk about this anecdote a lot, but you know, we did the NCT thing, went to a play date with all the other babies, and they must have been about 5 months old, and they're all sitting up playing, and she couldn't sit up. That was the first milestone that she missed. She smiled on time. She was a very smiley baby, which was so lovely. But she just couldn't sit, and we didn't know at the time, because we were aware of her hip dysplasia, whether it was a physical thing to do with her hips, or whether it was whether it was developmental thing. But she couldn't sit up. And I remember sitting, she was sort of in this bumbo chair, and she was so wobbly in it. And I remember sitting watching her and just thinking, oh, please just do it. Please just do it. And it's awful to look back at it, but I didn't expect to be the mother with the child who was falling behind. You know, I didn't expect to be the mother whose child couldn't do it. I always thought that she would be first, that she'd be best, you know, that I would be the best mum, because you do. And she just wasn't doing it. And it was really hard. It was really confronting for me. And I remember I spent a fortune on chairs. We had every single kind of baby chair you could imagine in our tiny London flat, you know, the hard molded plastic ones, the nests, the soft ones, you know, like just loads of cushions and pillows, like absolutely anything to try and encourage her to just sit up. She just didn't do it. And I was upset. I was frustrated. I felt like it was a reflection on me. And it's really hard to look back on those times, because I just want to give myself a hug, because you do put so much pressure on yourself as a mum, particularly as a new mum, as a first time mum, having had 2 other kids. Like, I could not have stopped them sitting up. They just do it. You know, they just spring up one day and that's it, right? They just
you only do so little. They do the rest.
That's it. You know, it's they have to do it, and that's the thing that just wasn't there with Bea. She didn't she didn't do it. And there was nothing that I could have done to make her do it. And obviously, in retrospect, we know why she didn't do it. But in those early days where we didn't have the genetic diagnosis, where her tests were coming back clear, particularly, you know, that was really hard. So we were referred to Great Ormond Street. We lived in London at the time under the absolutely amazing, obviously world-class genetics department. And we had another round of tests. I think it blurs now. And again, they came back clear. And we were like, do you know what? They said, do you want to just go away and enjoy your baby for a bit and see what happens? So we did.
That sounds like good advice.
Yeah.
As well.
So we did. But yeah, you know, she fed okay. We always say that, you know, eating is not one of the, like, she can finger feed. She struggles with cutlery because her gross and fine motor skills aren't great, but she's always been really good with her food. So that's something that we don't worry about with her. And yeah, I mean, she's wonderful. And just getting to know her, and, you know, we did go back ultimately for the check-in just before she was 2, and saw the doctor. And at that point, she developed to a point. Kabuki also has like quite a distinctive facial, some distinctive facial features, particularly the eyes are a particular shape, which is why it's called Kabuki syndrome, because it was discovered. It was only discovered, or only, I mean, these, you know, it's absolutely, I won't get into genetics because I don't know enough about it myself.
It's really fascinating though.
Yeah, it's useful to know.
It was only kind of recognized as a condition in 1994. So, you know, it kind of blows my mind that pre-1994, there are generations and generations and generations of people who will have had Kabuki syndrome, but it was not understood or recognized. Nobody put them together as a cohort. So yes, but it was discovered by doctors in Japan, and they felt that this eye shape reminded them of Kabuki makeup, Kabuki theater makeup. Anybody who's into makeup, you know, you've got your Kabuki brushes. It's kind of a term that's associated with makeup. So that the eye shape, that's where the name of it came from. But yes, so she's got quite a distinctive eye shape. But yes, I've lost my train of thought. I've gone into Kabuki theatre.
I think that was really useful. It's really useful to understand symptoms, to understand, because you never know, there might be someone on here listening and that will be useful for. And I really liked what you said about allowing yourself to also enjoy motherhood, and them saying go and enjoy your child. I think there's a sense of, sometimes it's in the almost powerlessness and letting go that we find power. I think a lot of the, you know, Buddhist themes and theories are around that. Letting go is power. I wanted to touch on a couple of things that we spoke on initially. Now, number one is that the resilience part, because I think fundamentally the summary of you, Leisa, is resilience. It's the resilience to get up every day, right? The resilience to do what you do, the resilience to be strong even when you don't feel strong. So I want to understand, you mentioned therapy, you mentioned how you cope. I mean, is there any other kind of mental shifts that you've had to adjust to that perhaps would help someone else who's listening to this?
Do you know what? I have clung to work like a life raft. Genuinely like a life raft. And it's really interesting. I had some interesting conversations on my podcast with women who, you know, had to step away from work or have chosen to step away from work. And it's really interesting because it's not something I ever considered. I was fortunately not ever pushed into a place where I didn't have a choice. But I've always absolutely clung to work. I mean, going back to work after having maternity leave with B, we didn't have the genetic diagnosis for her, but she just had a major hip operation when she was 9 months old. I went back to work when she was 12 months old. I took a year. And we got her into a nursery, which is a mainstream nursery, which we were very lucky. You know, they didn't, again, this is something that I didn't consider. I just thought, oh, well, after 12 months, I'll go back to work. I'll put the child in childcare. That's that. You don't consider like, well, if she's got a lot of additional needs, nursery is a private institution. They can take who they like. They could say that they didn't want her, you know. But I put her into nursery at 12 months, and they were amazing with her. And she did stay in private nursery all the way up until the point where she started school, and she does go to a special school. So I've been really fortunate in that regard that I have been able to stay in work because I had childcare. And the way my family is sort of set up is my husband is a freelance journalist, so he works for himself deadline to deadline. So he does drop-offs and pickups and a lot of the hospital appointments, actually. And that's something that I've really had to let go of some guilt about. You know, I'm her mother, yes, but he is her father. And, you know, he is the equivalent of me, and I am the equivalent of him in any given situation. You know, it's not any less that he is there and not me. He is as invested in her welfare as me, you know. So if it's him, and I'm doing this, and this is what's important, you know. That's something that I've had to really deal with. But now I do feel quite strongly about that. I don't feel guilty about that.
I think I'll let Alex talk on that.
Well, I was just going to say, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Leisa, that I can almost hear the mum guilt, like, still
about
talking
that,
a little bit, because even if you don't feel it that much, then it's that need to explain.
You feel like you have to justify it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like it makes me deficient somehow as a mother, that I need to explain that he cares about her as much as I do, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, but I do think that,
right?
Yeah,
that's part of the pressure that's put onto mums, isn't it? That we're expected to be the person who does all the medical appointments and things like that. And actually, particularly if you have a lot of medical appointments, how can you possibly do that and work?
Yeah.
But you've made a good point there. I think also that is a tip for anybody managing anything that requires, you know, them to think of balance and think of sharing with their partner and just not putting too much pressure on themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, lucky that I have a partner who is, you know, that's our setup. We moved out of London a few years ago to move closer to my family, to my mum, to my sister, who, you know, help us out enormously with childcare as well. So we've built our own little village basically around us, because there's nothing else that you can rely on. You know, and you talk about you asked me about resilience, Tiffany, and I think I feel so much stronger having gone through the experience of parenting B. And like I say, work has just been so important for my mental health, for me to retain a sense of self. You know, the systems that you have to navigate for a disabled child are they would just blow your mind. Wow. You know, you have to apply for a benefit called DLA, Disability Living Allowance, and that is like a 40-page document or something. It genuinely makes me feel sick thinking about it, where you just have to talk about what your child can't do, all the things that they can't do, all the most difficult, most negative, awful things, the hardest things. You know, it's awful. It's an awful ordeal, and they put you through that. And you know, they don't want to hear anything positive, because you're not allowed to be disabled and happy and have some support, because if you're happy, then, you know, if you're not totally miserable, then you know, you're not going to get any support, any money. It's just awful. And that's just one of the kind of things that we contend with as SEN parents, that you just wouldn't know about if you didn't have a disabled child. But DLA is an ordeal. You know, but then that unlocks certain other support for you. You know, there's the EHCP as well, which a lot of parents might be familiar with that term, which is the education, care, health plan, which is for children with SEN, which details the support that you know, the additional support they're entitled to in school. All of these things are really hard. They're really hard to do. They're really hard for me to do as somebody who's got an English degree from a good university, as a native English speaker, as someone who is a journalist and writes for a living. It's hard. The systems are set up to make you fail. Because, you know, because because it's expensive to support children who have additional needs. And you know, it's shocking. But, you know, from my standpoint, we need to be supporting more women with disabled children to get into work. It costs 3 times as much to raise a child with a disability than a child without a disability. And we know how expensive it is to raise any child, right? 3 times as much. But if you have a child with a disability, you are that much less likely to be in any kind of paid work. And you are also likely to have financial responsibility for that child for the rest of their life. And that is something that weighs on me as a SEN parent and other SEN parents whose children are unlikely to go down a path of leaving for university, of leaving for work, of living independently. I need to stay fit and healthy, and I need to make hay while the sun shines, because I'm going to be supporting her hopefully long after I'm dead, because she deserves to live a very long and comfortable and happy life, and no one else is going to provide that for her apart from, you know, me and my husband.
Yeah.
Obviously she's got siblings, we've got extended family, etc., but you know, they're going to have their own lives. There's all of that stuff as well, you know. So it's just the financial aspect of it is so important. You know, we talk about work and, you know, ourselves and our sense of self, etc., but it's also about the money. It's really important.
Yeah.
I can totally get that. You know, I think from your perspective, what needs to change? There's probably a lot.
So there needs to be definitely more more support systems, you know, as there needs to be better, more affordable childcare for everybody. That needs to be for children, whatever their abilities, right? It needs to not be a lottery dependent on where you are. It needs to be, there should be, you know, childcare is not a luxury. And the way that the system is at the moment, it is a luxury if you can afford good childcare. It is essential economic infrastructure. So there needs to be good childcare, regardless of the abilities of your child. We feel very, very, very far away from that with, you know, when you're talking about children with disabilities. There needs to be, I think, you know, better flexibility for parents in work. And I know there's some amazing headway being made with that, which is absolutely brilliant. The government recently mandated something called carers leave, which is now a legal requirement for companies to let anybody with a caring requirements, not just for children, for elderly people or, you know, friends, etc., any kind of caring responsibilities, to have an unpaid week of 5 days a year, which is, you know, a step forward. But again, to bring it back to the money, you know, if you are in an intense period of caring, my daughter had a major her second major hip operation last year when she was 6, you know, and I needed to take time off work for that. And I took annual leave because what do I not need on top of that very stressful time? Financial worries, you know. But then that has the knock-on effect, of course, that I took 2 weeks annual leave, which ate 2 weeks away from my annual leave. And actually what I really could have done with after that was a proper break, a
holiday,
for me, you know. So it's just chipping away all the time. So again, just, you know, if we're talking about DEI, you know, if you're talking about equity, like a paid week would, you know, some paid additional time from an employer would be a really, really nice benefit to support carers in your organization.
Okay. I'm interested to know, I think that's really useful, Leisa, because my ambition is still about talking to the needs of mothers, right? And I think a lot of it is structural, a lot of it is from the perspective of someone going through what you're going through. You can say what needs to change, and hopefully, you know, with time and people advocating for this change, we'll begin to make the progress. Now, to kind of get into the final steps of this, I'm interested in, because I remember when we spoke, you mentioned post-traumatic growth. I'm interested to know about the woman you're now becoming and have become as a part of this experience, because I speak a lot on the podcast about my experiences in, you know, growing up, losing my mom, just different traumas and grief and how that's shaped me as a person. And I'm grateful for those things now, but obviously at the time I was like, OMG. So I'm interested a lot about reading and you know, sort of literature around this. There's a writer called Viktor Frankl who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. So number one, I'm interested to know, I mean, are there any books that you've read that's really helped you to develop that resilience, or kind of given you a new perspective that's helped your journey?
No.
Okay.
It's the easy answer. Do you know what the two books I always talk about?
No, but that's
Because I
fine
don't
too.
read.
I haven't got time. No, I completely understand.
I should. It's terrible. Like, say I've got an English degree. I feel like I did all my reading up to the age of 21. Absolutely terrible ever since.
No, Lisa, do you know what? I'm the biggest advocate for an audiobook.
Yeah,
I know
this
is what I need to do.
Even Blinkist, I've had to like downgrade my kind of like, it's bad, but yeah.
And I'm doing audiobooks with one kid.
Do you know what? Not on building resilience, but I think so. The two brilliant books about, you know, motherhood and women that I always recommend are Pregnant Then Screwed and so Invisible Women by Christiana. Oh, why? I can't think of her name now. That's absolutely terrible.
We'll get the information. What's the name of the book?
Christina or Christiana? Criado Perez. Invisible Women. Again, it's out.
Invisible Woman. Ago. I think it's. Let me just check.
Anyway, it's a few years old. It's absolutely amazing.
I haven't read that, so I'm going to add it to my list.
I would hugely recommend that. But I think, you know,
Caroline Criado Perez.
Caroline, that's why I'm not saying that. That's right. Absolutely. That one, yeah. Really, that's an absolutely brilliant book. Sorry, no disrespect, Caroline. It's amazing. And I read an absolutely beautiful book. If anybody is listening to this and wondering about how they are going to cope if they, you know, have a disabled child, Charlie Beswick does amazing work in this space. She was a guest on my podcast. And she wrote an absolutely beautiful book called Our Altered Life. So she had twin boys, one of whom has a genetic condition and the other who did not. And she just talks very honestly and openly. Her boys are young adults now, they're 18. She just talks very openly and honestly about how dark it was in those early days and how she pushed through. And I think, you know, again, for me, just hearing so many of us go through it, you know, 11% of children in the UK are disabled. There are so many of us out there. And it's just really hard to find the time, to find the means, to, you know, to understand these stories. But I think, rather, you know, not so much reading books, but I think certainly just learning to advocate for B in, you know, medically, in terms of, like, say, you know, these systems that we exist in, has been a huge boost for me, because I feel so strong, because I have to be strong. Like, I am her representative in this world, and it's likely that I always will be. And there is nothing like that to give you a shot of confidence and make you go, do you know what? Nothing is going to beat me here. And I think, again, to bring it back to work, like, that's just such a powerful thing for me to be able to bring into work, is that sense of, I feel so much more capable now since I've had B. You know, that perspective, there's nothing that can rattle me too much at work when I'm going home to, you know, to a 7-year-old who needs help to put her beans on her fork, you know, like that you just get this amazing perspective. I'm more caring. I would like to think that I've always had pretty good EQ, but I'm certainly more caring. I'm a better communicator. I'm more efficient, and I just value that this time, you know, for myself in work. That's my me time. That is my respite, and it is an opportunity for me to be myself, to have adult conversations, to achieve something, to learn something, to grow. And like I say, I've always clung on to work for that reason, and it's only really, as I keep saying, like, B's 7 now, so we're a few years into this, and it's only really now that I see what that journey has been. But yeah, post-traumatic growth is something that I learned about recently. I think I read it on LinkedIn. I hang out on LinkedIn a lot. If anybody's listening to this and you're on LinkedIn, come and connect with me.
Shout out to LinkedIn.
But yeah, absolutely fascinating. And I just, again, it just really spoke to me, and I thought that is absolutely what has happened to me.
Wow. Thank you for that, Lisa.
It's really amazing. I think incredibly powerful. And like, I think, you know, where do people find you? Because I imagine people listening to this who, you know, would like to listen to your podcast, that this might be helpful to. How do they find you, Lisa?
So you can listen to the podcast on any major podcast channel. So Spotify, Apple, we're across pretty much everything.
Affiliates. I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm not as good as you guys. You've got more episodes than me. We turned one over the summer, but I've done one series. So there are only 6 episodes, but we're deep into planning season 2. You know, small steps. But yeah, there are. Oh, actually, there's 6 episodes. We did a brilliant Christmas special as well with another podcast called Can I swear on here? Is that acceptable?
Yeah, go for it.
Kids are listening. That's fine. If it's a sweary podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is called Fucking Normal.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, and again, that's obviously a SEN parenting podcast, very sweary and raucous and fun, absolutely brilliant podcast. So I had the 2 hosts of that do a Christmas special with me, which is really fun.
Nice.
And yeah, please come and listen to the podcast. As I say, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love that. And I think, you know, the difficult thing for me in starting to talk about this is that I really didn't want to seem less capable. I've spent my whole life becoming capable, you know, being somebody who you want to achieve stuff, right? You want to be strong. You want to be good.
Part of your identity, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I really worried about starting to talk about my caring responsibilities. Well, because one, we always want to minimize ourselves as mothers at work, right? And like I say, if you have a child who needs additional care, you kind of want to minimize that. But also, I didn't want anybody to like feel sorry for me because Bee's amazing. You know, she's absolutely awesome. I'm so lucky to have all my children, you know, but Bee has taught me so much that I would never have learned if I hadn't had her. You know, I'm a better, stronger, more capable person for having had her. And I know I'm probably sound like I'm sugarcoating this a lot. You know, it is really hard. That's not to say this is all just absolutely wonderful and unicorns and rainbows. It is really bloody hard. And you get those moments like in the theatre where I literally cried. And the woman sitting next to me must have been like, who is this stupid woman crying at Bluey? Like, who are these middle-aged women who cry at Bluey? But, you know, it gets you. It is hard. But also, it's worth it.
Love that.
That's
a great place to end. Thank you, Leisa.
Thank you
really
so
beautiful.
much.
Thank you for joining us.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.